As we get into this in the title slide here and thinking about 3 steps to avoid layoffs, the first thing actually I want to do is I want to hear from you. And to do that, we're going to use a different tech device. I'm not going to use the polling. I'd like you to bring out your smartphone. And if you need to, if you don't have a smartphone nearby, just open up another browser on your computer. I want you to go to menti.com, menti.com. And as soon as you do that, I just want you to enter this code, 916326. I know all of you out there, about half of you are going to decide to do this, and half of you are like, I just came on here to hear the recording. I promise you it will be worth your while, because what we're going to do is we're going to present back to you all what each other is thinking and going through, that you as the audience are going through. So you get to see each other a little bit on this. So that would be much better, and we'd really appreciate it if you did that. All right, I'm going to ask you the first Mentimeter question here, and that is, what type of organization do you represent? On the bottom right-hand side there, that's the number of people that have voted. So the first thing we're trying to do is understand, who are you? Who out there is listening on this webinar, and what area are you in? And we'll wait till this gets to about half of our audience here, and then I'll move us on to the next question. But you can see a lot of you fit into the other category, or you just don't want to be labeled. Some of you are in professional services, consulting. Obviously, these are areas that are under a lot of stress, and some manufacturing. There's some parts in Barry Waymiller there. Maria has also put in the code. It's 916326. Every time I go to Mentimeter, you'll see that code in the top of your screen as well. And if you have any kind of tech issues or you can't put your vote in, just put it into the chat room so people can see that for you as well. All right, next question on Mentimeter. So thank you for this. We'll see good breakout of the people that we have here. The next question is this. I just want to know how you're feeling. I know that sounds like a strange question. We just met. I told you I was wearing slippers. I want to know how you're feeling from a standpoint of, how are we navigating through these unprecedented times? Is it optimistic? Hey, my team, they're doing great. Realistic? This is going to take some planning. Perhaps pessimistic? This is going to tough decisions ahead. And none of us are judging this part of it. I mean, pessimistic is in, boy, this is really very challenging for a business. Or on the very right-hand side there, you see, actually not really sure, probably all the above. It just depends on what time. Almost over 90 votes. And just really quick, thank you so much for bringing up Mentimeter and having us work through this. We'll ask some other questions as we get into the content, but it really helps us out. And I think it'll help you out as well. So with that as a framing, we're going to jump into this. Sarah?
All right, as Matt switches the slides back over for you all, we've been having a lot of conversations with different organizations and leaders, and one of the things that we always stress is how do we start every conversation with our values, and as we should all be doing with our people. So we're starting this one with you all with our 3 values: seek to understand, show up to serve, and make it better. And certainly something that we're referring to is we're making decisions inside of our own business. The reason that we're doing this webinar, a couple of weekends ago, we received a call from a local CEO, a client of ours, and they were in this conversation. How are we going to progress through the next few weeks, the next few months, and what decisions are we going to make? And they had, as a leadership team, come together and decided that they were going to do a layoff. And so they gave us a call and said, we've been working with you guys. We just want to know the best way to do this. And so through a series of questions that we asked, navigating, talking to their VP of sales, talking to their leader of HR, ended up in a position where they reversed that decision, said we're going to go ahead and stick by all of our team members, and we're going to apply a concept that we're going to be talking about today, which is shared sacrifice. And we're going to look at some alternative means to be able to weather the storm, which happened to be the right decision for them given their business climate and their business circumstance. And so this is a quote from that CEO, that this is probably the most important decision many of us will ever make in our companies. The decision to flex to a shared sacrifice versus layoff was a culture-saving decision. And so as we navigated with that organization, the decision that they were facing, we realized there's probably a lot of business leaders, ourselves included, who are wrestling with this. And so as we kind of move through this content, we're going to be laying out a number of things that we've learned, both from our parent company, but also in conversations with clients. And Matt's mentioned Barry Waymiller, which is the organization that we are a part of. Some of you on the call might be highly familiar with Barry Waymiller, others less so. But it's actually a capital equipment goods manufacturer. And so we employ about 12,000 team members worldwide. We have 26 countries represented. We're a combination of 110 different acquisitions, so 110 different subcultures that we've integrated into the Berry-Wehmiller family. Now, we make the machines that make toilet tissue. We also make the machines that make cardboard boxes. And so for now, the parent company of Berry-Wehmiller is doing okay. We make parts for all of those machines that are making toilet tissue. However, it's still a conversation that we're in. We're just in that kind of category of let's wait and see. For our consulting business, the story is a little bit different, more aligned to where some of you might be on the call. However, we'll share the story of how Berry-Wehmiller responded in the 2008-2009 downturn, when in fact we did have to make some difficult choices. And as we are out in the world and sourcing other people's content, one of the things that's kind of interesting observations is that a number of us are looking towards these kind of historic events to gain some wisdom from. And so you're seeing a lot of quotes from historical figures. So we pulled one from Thomas Paine: "No, this won't be easy. The outcome is uncertain, and the victory we all hope for will require extraordinary courage above all else." One important piece of framing for us is that courage isn't necessarily that you do or do not do layoffs, but the courage is really to examine the decision. And the courage perhaps is to have the really tough conversations that will ultimately lead to a path forward for each individual business. So with that as a backdrop, we're going to put you back into Mentimeter and ask you a few more questions. And so the next one that we're going to ask you is simply, what is one word you associate with layoffs? So go ahead and enter your words. Oh, you guys are ahead of us. You're doing 51 people already in. And as we see those come up, if the word is bigger, it just means that multiple people enter that into the system. So we're seeing loss, we're seeing pain, uncertainty, money, absolutely very factual. It's a decision, it's a problem, it's a struggle. Divorce is a word put in there. And so a parallel to something somebody might be going in their personal life, and that same anxiety. Sad, the word human, it's a very human decision. Extreme, job loss. Somebody put in there short-sighted. Perhaps if you look at some of the research, and for every business, again, it's going to be different, but most of the research will say perhaps it's a short-term way to save money, but in the long term, it actually costs you when you think about the rehiring impact. Discouraging.
I like that somebody put in the word yuck.
Yuck. Yuck is good. Yuck is good. As with most of you in, I so appreciate you all doing that. We're going to transition to our next Mentimeter question. And that is simply, my company is planning layoffs in the future, and your choices are not even on the radar, not even talking about it, mentioned but not planning, in the planning process, or D, plan in place, ready to go. And so again, just checking in with you all to say, where are we in this conversation? Something that we'll bring up later on in the webinar is, even if you aren't having the conversation as a leadership team, we suspect most team members are thinking about it, or they're at least mentally asking the question, I wonder if my company has a plan in place, or are they in the planning process? So with quite a few of you in, we've got about a third not even on the radar, 45%, so majority saying mentioned and not planning, a few in the planning process, and then a few that are plan in place, ready to go. And again, there's no judgment on where we're at in this process. Everybody has a different circumstance and a different business reality that they happen to be navigating. And then a third question for you all, and that's the kind of looking forward piece. My business after COVID-19 will be better than before. Perhaps that's true for some of us. Same as before. We're going to weather this and be, coming out the same way. Lower than before, and then perhaps unsure. I'm not Nostradamus. Who knows how long this is going to last, or what the economy is going to look like when we get to the other side. So interestingly enough, a majority are saying better than before. And so any and all chat, welcome on why that might be. This is where we can learn from each other. A good chunk saying, you know what, I don't know, which is perfectly fair. And then a split on lower than before, and perhaps a few same as before. So again, so appreciate you all putting that into Mentimeter. It allows us to get to know you better, but also so that we can all see that every reality potentially is a little bit different as we transition back over to the slides.
We talk about our business returning to pre-COVID performance or better. So you just saw the input from some of you. And oftentimes when we're asked these binary questions, yes or no, and I don't have 100% certainty on whether it will or will not, probably somewhere there in the middle, we start asking questions. The more uncertain I am, the more questions that I ask. So we're providing some of those down to you. And of course, we're using this in our own business. We're using this with our clients. I'm not going to go through all these questions. And again, we're going to provide all of these slides, this recording to you afterwards. But here are some questions that we start to ask while doing layoffs. And you might think, well, what's the military guy talking about layoffs for? Well, I'm spending 25 years in the US military and also working for a defense contractor as a fellowship, also serving with the United Nations and in NATO. I went through actually a lot of layoffs. We went through several. Now the military has a nice acronym for it. It was reduction in force. And so then it became basically a layoff, and for our civilian employees as well. We would ask these questions. And the reason I bring this up is to understand, how can layoffs negatively impact organizations? This is not my opinion. So as an example, when we asked all of you, hey, what word do you associate with layoffs? I don't know that there are any positive correlation words in there. Does it affect quality? It affects team member safety. And this is through research, not our opinion. Innovation decreases, your sales relationships that you have, the morale, the organizational trust. Obviously, the institutional knowledge that I have decreases. And obviously, moving forward, the top talent in the future. In other words, what are people going to say when they leave your organization? I would tell you from personal experience, whenever a rift was going on or a reduction in force, or that we had to let go of some of the civilians supporting the Department of Defense, it completely captivated the entire organization. And this is during a time of 2 wars that we were working with. And this isn't a story about the military or politics. It's just to say that even the thought of this simply starts to take over the psyche of the entire organization. And either people are talking about it or they're thinking about it and trying to figure out who can they talk to. I'll tell you one of the impacts it had in the military was they did a survey afterwards to try and understand, where do people in the Air Force, where were they going to get their most trusted source of information? At the very top was peer groups. The next one down was unauthorized type of blog posts. At the very, very bottom was official presentations, official communications. It started to ruin some of the trust, wondering, well, what is going to happen? What is that transparency? So that's the negative impact on organizations. How it impacts the individual, this is research again. One, well, let's just look at what the certain environment is right now. There's an uncertain impact on our economy, makes finding a job pretty much nearly impossible, especially right now with a lot of organizations having a hiring freeze. We do understand that there are some organizations that are hiring very, very heavily right now. Losing health benefits during a health crisis, that's a problem. And loss of job ranks in the top 10 most stressful times in a person's life, impacts their immune system. So you can see this follow-on impact, if you will. When we were thinking about it, when we're thinking about any large or complex decision, we really like this as a decision tool. Control, influence, and can't control. And so when we're trying to think about a really big decision, oftentimes breaking it up into its discrete parts can really help us think through this. And when we do, and we're going to work with this tool later on the expense side of this, but when I put things into these 3 buckets, not only does it break up the thinking a lot easier, it allows my team structure so they can provide their information. And I start to realize that a lot of the stuff that's going on doesn't fit in the purely control or purely can't control. It fits in the influence area. And that's a lot about what we're talking about today and that is, how do we influence those decisions?
You mentioned Barry Wehmiller as our parent company, and when we pull an example for us as inspiration from how did we weather the 2008 and 2009 downturn. At the time, I was about 5 years into my Barry Wehmiller career and had an opportunity to kind of live through what it felt like as a team member to be on the receiving end. In the beginning, 2008, we actually felt like we were going to be okay. Capital equipment is a fairly steady industry. We serve consumer goods, and so it felt like we might be able to weather the storm. Our first indication otherwise was as a customer pulled an order off of our backlog. And so a group of us received an email from our CEO, Bob Chapman, and it stated exactly what's on this slide. Our purpose statement is we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people. So if that is true, then how does a caring family respond when we're going through crisis? His answer to that question was all family members would absorb some pain so that no member of the family had to experience a dramatic loss. And so we implemented a variety of things, some things that you all might be considering. One was we suspended a 401k match. We also did a voluntary early retirement program. But the most significant measure that we put in place was a furlough program. The way we structured it was we had to take 2 to 4 weeks off. Those in a higher salary band had to take more time off. We set a time frame that you could take that time in, so 3 months, which happened to fall over the summer, and you could pick whichever week that you wanted to. And so that came from a place that if we're going to ask you to give something up, we're going to try and give you as much flexibility versus kind of assigning weeks, and teams kind of worked out who was going to cover the work and who was going to be able to take their furlough. Some of the unexpected benefits. So when you implement any program as quickly as we did, you can't necessarily predict every single thing that's going to happen. The primary one was we had unintentionally created a currency by which people could actually take care of one another. And so as much as the 2 weeks seemed like a reasonable thing for some team members, they're living paycheck to paycheck. And so taking 2 weeks off had a significant impact on their family. And so for some team members, it happened to be summertime. In this case, you could travel. And so for some team members, they thought this is a great opportunity to do some things that I wouldn't have time to do so otherwise. And they donated days into a pool, and team members who couldn't take the time off could kind of grab days, apply for those days, and then avoid the furlough. And so the impact from an empathy and trust standpoint in the organization, not something that we planned, but something that was a huge, huge benefit. Despite being asked to take essentially what was a pay cut, the flexibility that we built into the program drove that empathy and trust and loyalty up to say you're willing to stand by us, and so absolutely I want to support the overall effort. Because we were able to keep our talent, all the industry knowledge, all of the skills, the organization rebounded even faster than we had predicted, and we had a record year in 2010 and every year thereafter. Additionally, once we got kind of past the crisis, we returned those 401k funds with interest. And so the combination of those decisions over time, and again, not saying these decisions apply to every organization and every industry, but the way that the decisions were made, communicated, and considered when we look at our culture, even in some of the toughest hit areas, people said, you're willing to stand by us. And so those benefits are certainly ones that we're actually even seeing today as we enter into the same conversation within Barry Wehmiller of how to weather this crisis as well.
We recognize, as well as Sarah shares that story, recognize that not every organization is exactly like Barry Wehmiller. There are certain specific conditions that you all are facing. So here are the 3 steps we use to avoid layoffs. I know it's going to seem a little overly simplistic when we start here, but that's what we're trying to do, is take a very, very complex subject, a very difficult decision, and break it down into its easier to understand elements. Step 1 is obviously reduce expenses, and not just reduce them, but that relentless reduction of these expenses. So some of these might include, and you'll see the list that we put up here: suspend matching retirement funds, bonuses, annual pay increases, eliminate non-essential maintenance, delay capital expenditures. And as I'm mentioning this, I'd really appreciate if you could put in the chat room, and again, to all panelists and attendees, so we have 180 something people, I think, on this, share what you're doing that's different from this, that might be of interest for the audience as they, because you can share it to each other. I know sublet your available space, perhaps. Consider relocation to a less expensive option. Scrub monthly expenses, and I mean everything from the phone bills to all the employee perks. That they're nice things, and I get that during good times we should be sharing those, but during these times, just unneeded. And a little side note that I think that if you come from Alaska, Sarah has actually never had top ramen noodles. I've never met someone that had never had top ramen. You're missing out, I gotta tell you. All right, I mentioned this tool, that we would come back to this tool. So in this tool, I take all the expenses that I have, and I'm going to bucket them into these 3 areas. So one is the control. This means, what do I 100% have complete control over? I think what you'll find in those expenses, most of those fit into like a discretionary spending area. And so the first thing I do is look very, very hard at eliminating those. An example would be senior team pay, senior team bonuses or variable comp, and you can decide which one there, but what do I 100% control? I'm going to jump to the outer ring. This is what I 100% is 100% outside of my control. We put some items in there, such things like taxes, healthcare, perhaps your workman's comp claims. These are things that I just have to keep 100% outside of my control. Everything else fits in the influence box. So perhaps my loan terms, my lease terms, I get that I can't cancel those, but can I have a conversation with the bank? Can I have a conversation with who has a loan on my capital equipment as an example? I could reduce, negotiate, renegotiate, defer my vendor payments that I make, perhaps even how much money it takes me to bring my product or service to market. I'm going to look at everything I can there. The reason we're staying on this tool for a moment is I'd like you to think very, very hard and work with your team to say, I want us to put everything for our expenses in the 100% can control. What are those? When we are doing this for our own business from the consultancy, we're looking at this and we realize the amount of expenses, the expenses that fit in that 100%. I can't talk about it. I can't negotiate it. I can't move it around. I can't defer it. 100% outside of my control. That list is actually fairly small. And again, that means everything else is pretty much fair game. I'm not saying it just works out that way, but at least that way I've separated it out and I say, these are the things that we should go after, deferring them, reducing them. I know of companies that have gone to their landlord for their lease and said, I want to defer the rent for the next 4 months, 5 months. In return, I'm going to give you percentage extra 6 months down the road, and made that deal with that lending institution. So these are things that I want you to think about. What are the expenses that I 100% can control? Everything else fits into that block of we're going to talk about it or eliminate it.
Right, our second category, focus on value generation. And certainly when we start talking about value generation, we tend to kind of shift our mindset and start thinking about profitability or revenue. And so just to begin this with some dictionary definitions of the difference between revenue and value, revenue being the actual income from normal business activities versus the value, which is the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. And so some of us are dramatically impacted on the revenue side, yet we can still show up and add a tremendous amount of value and invest. And saw in the chat the reason why people think that they're going to come out better on the other side is because we're doing a lot to increase value during a time when perhaps we can't increase our revenue. So to further break down value into kind of 3 different categories, we think about it in terms of new value, more value, and better value. New value being literally a new product, service, or perhaps a market segment that we're not serving currently but could. More value, how am I becoming increasingly operationally efficient, or perhaps I have different delivery options. And then better value, how am I enhancing and playing the relationship game? How am I focusing on quality? And so as we think about some examples in creating value, and I think there's a huge number of them out there, and some are well sourced as you're reading all of the great LinkedIn articles, beverage companies that are bottling hand sanitizer. American Airlines is an organization that we happen to know quite well, and you might think that for them transitioning to cargo-only flights is easy, but they don't do that typically. They'll put cargo on passenger flights, but this is a huge, huge shift in the business model for the world's largest airline. The picture of that desk, that is Matt's, that's what he's looking at right now, that is his basement, and so I would like you to note that he brought lighting and a microphone home from the office. I did not.
The slippers weren't embarrassing enough.
I know, I just felt like I had to add some color, so he didn't tip me off that that's what we were doing. But for us as a consulting organization, how do you take everything and put it online in a matter of weeks? All those great restaurants who are serving us the delivery and curbside pickup, and all those schools that are transitioning to teaching online. So there's lots of different ways that organizations are realizing I can very quickly shift my business model, and perhaps it's not revenue generating, but am I creating value for my clients, my customers, the community in whichever way that I can. A tool for you all when we think about how do I create value is to lean into some team brainstorming. We know that typically if you had to be really black and white about it, there's two types of change. There's technical change, in which I can kind of throw a tool at it, versus adaptive change. We as a team or organization have to adapt to a new reality. And the way that you solve adaptive challenges is by engaging with people and generating as many ideas as possible. So this is a tool for you all to use with your team. New value. Okay, what do our clients need and what do they need right now? And are we in a position to serve that need? From a more value standpoint, what can we just get really, really fast at, much, much better at? Processes and procedures, and maybe they can't serve us right now, but on the back side of this will be so much more well positioned. How can we do our part to make it easier for our customers? Perhaps that's payment terms or access, availability to the content. And then how can we just play that relationship game? How can we lean in and show up to serve one of our values during this time and post, and increase the quality of our products and services? So these are open-ended questions for you all to bring back, and perhaps do a virtual brainstorming session with people that happen to be in your span of care.
Yeah, and Sarah, I think in the past webinars we've done this, and people really start to bring up the voice of the customer a lot. Mm-hmm. This is a great time to bring that up. Adaptive problems are typically solved by the people closest to the problems. You're talking to your team, who's talking to those people experiencing those problems. That's why we structure these questions like this. I saw in the chat room people mentioning and asking, will we be sharing the slides? Yes, we'll share the slides, recordings. We have some tools as well to give you with this. The step 3 here is to apply shared sacrifice. And I probably should make this actually more direct on this. You should consider applying shared sacrifice. Does it fit for the organization before we're making that kind of decision? Shared sacrifice. And Sarah told a story of this, but defined it would be the idea that we all give up something so that no one person gives up everything. So let's talk about a couple of ways that we could do this. So one is reduction in work hours. And I also saw in the chat people talking about the CARES Act. And you'll see on the bottom left-hand side of our slide here, we're mentioning this part. We're not experts in it. I don't know that right now, with it being so fresh, there are, quote unquote, a pure expert in this. So we're going to tell you this. Before making this kind of decision, and in making these decisions, please, please, please look into see what provisions, both for your hourly and your salary employees. I'm not going to go down the road of telling you exactly what those are, because I think it's so specific for each organization, but there are some things in there. And I saw in the chat room people mentioning that can soften this blow a little bit, that can get people to a certain percentage. So again, there are provisions in the CARES Act for both salary and hourly employee. Please, please, please look and see how that applies to your organization, especially in making these kind of decisions. All right, so one way of shared sacrifice, reduction in work hours. So giving team members their time in return for their sacrifice and pay. Sarah mentioned this is what Barry Waymiller did, furloughing team members in week increments, and if possible, allow team members to select their own week. That way they get some control. And it might sound like, well, that sounds extremely operationally complex. And I'll let Sarah jump in here from seeing speed off, but actually the decision to go to this shared sacrifice was the hard one. Actually, the implementation of it and people being able to share and having that currency actually worked out quite well. And we were still running operations during that time and increasing our operational efficiencies. Also reducing the number of hours worked in each day and or work a 4-hour work week. So one obviously is the reduction in work hours. If operationally furloughs were not possible, so an example of that was US military, there were things that we had to do and keep online, keep running, keep vigilant, and therefore couldn't do a furlough program. And I know some of your organizations out there, it's not viable either, especially if those folks, some of them are actually revenue generating in the organization. So if you have a large amount of client-facing salespeople and that are actually having work with clients, actually doing a furlough program puts you further in the hole and hurts that. So it's not possible. One is we would say, and I know people might say this is a little contentious, we're going to go right after this, reduce the pay of the senior team. They've had the most to gain when times were good, and the opposite should be true in troubled times. They should sacrifice the most. That is pretty much, if I'm going to give you a definition of leadership, that's what it is. You serve people. Implement a temporary pay cut. We would recommend on this one a greater pay cut, obviously, for higher paid team members, and then be thinking about what that floor should be. In other words, no one in the organization is going to go below this income, and then that percentage perhaps differs, but there's a threshold you're setting. And again, just a plug for the CARES Act, making sure that we're very, very aware of how your organization, how that might apply for that. All right. As we think about how we communicate to this, and you'll see the spinal tap reference we really enjoy. This one goes to 11. I'm going to avoid the English accent this time and be much more mature. One is when we're talking to our teams, we're talking to our organizations. The first step is I'm literally going to give you some context. I'm going to let you know, and I'm going to give you a financial overview, not 100% open finance. The CFO gets up there and presents in an MBA style. I mean, just a couple of brief overview slides. Here's the mountain we're climbing. Here's the hill we have to go through, all of those kind of things. This is what we're up against. One is it's going to give context, and the other is it's going to start to build trust in the honesty and transparency you have with your people. Step two is I'm going to refer to my values. I'm not just going to say, here's finances, and then therefore, here's what we're doing. I'm going to refer to those values. So look at that poster in your office. Look at the who we are in the web on your website, that section. Look at that. Cite the values. Because we believe in this, or your purpose or mission or vision, because we believe in this, here are the steps we're going to take. Focus on the people. This decision is protecting a future for all team members. Sometimes we can get lost in the numbers and pretend like it's just about saving a balance sheet, but really this is about people's livelihood, their future. Focus on the people, much more inspirational. Number four, we just say is to be honest. And that means when there's something that comes up that says that you don't know the answer to, we highly recommend you say, that's a great question, I don't know. We would recommend as well, we avoid the discussion of doomsday. And by that, what we mean is if someone's asking later on, well, could we be doing this? What happens if it gets worse? I don't know. I'm going to stick right back to the 4 points. Here's where we are. Here's our value. Here's the action we're taking today. And I'm going to avoid going into, well, let me play the what if scenarios, not for the whole group. If possible, definitely in person. If not, and especially this is the case for us broadcasting from the middle of the US in St. Louis, all from our homes. If not, then at least on video. And if bandwidth is a trouble, then at least the leader on video. I didn't put this in here, but I will tell you, and this was from the military and it's also for the civilian in any organization, in times like this, even if you are not talking about it, even if you have not mentioned it, even if no one has asked, people are thinking about it. I would highly recommend you put together a communication plan. And if your communication plan is, we're not considering it, I want you to know that, here's where we are, then we recommend you share that because people are thinking about it even if you haven't discussed it. The last framing on this. Go ahead,
sorry,
Sarah.
Matt, sorry to jump in. And we did have a question from Paul. What is the biggest resistance you all find when leaders look at this option? And I'm assuming, Paul, that you do mean shared sacrifice. And just to jump in and then hand it back to Matt to add a few thoughts.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know that we experienced resistance, honestly, at all. And I would say the same for the client company story that we mentioned in the beginning. The opposite tends to be true, that the emotions surrounding it for people who are fearful, to Matt's point, they're thinking that their job is at risk. And so the strongest emotion people feel is relief. I think the biggest question that gets raised is, how are we going to get the work done? And so I think one of the things is to say, allow your team to solve that problem, and they will. We did not, going into 2008, 2009, prescribe, this is the team that's going to take it, and then this one, and it's a waterfall approach. And it's a highly complex manufacturing business. We allowed people to figure it out. Working with this client organization, the VP of HR, ironically, she's the only person in HR. It's a small organization. And she was concerned about her role. She's like, well, I can't take a furlough. I'm the only person in HR. And she happens to be expecting her second child. And so I said, Marissa, you're going to go on maternity leave. What was going to be the plan? And she goes, yeah, good point. And so allow your team to figure it out. That tends to be the most popular question, but it's solvable, and allow your team to solve it, and they will. Matt,
thank you, Sarah. Thanks for the pause and thanks for calling that one out. Great comment, great question. I would agree with Sarah on the operational part. So I think where these I wouldn't call it pushback, but I would call it, when I'm trying to brainstorm an idea and I'm thinking about shared sacrifice, the first question that usually comes up is something about fairness or operations. And so using that tool, control, influence, can control, I'm going to go right back into, all right, if this is the problem, What do we influence about this? That'll allow you to break down your specific operational concerns and have a chat with that. The other part, and to Sarah's point, when people do this part of it, and this is why I had this next slide, it's really important that I'm not trying to talk about saving a company. And I know we are. I understand that part of it. I understand the business aspect of this. It's about saving each other. If I want people to be inspired and motivated and lean in and grab an oar and everybody row for the safety of the nearby island, then I need us to know it's not about just saving a balance sheet or an organization or a company. It is about saving each other. And it honestly, it literally is. I don't want to put someone out of work. I don't want someone to not be able to grow and share their gifts and talents in our organization. And therefore, we're all going to work and sacrifice something so that no one person has to sacrifice everything, if possible. Again, not judging. This is just as we think through this and you communicated it out, it's about saving each other.
We began this session with a quote from Thomas Paine about courage, and we mentioned that the courage isn't necessarily to follow this path that we've presented. The courage is, am I examining the decision? Am I doing the right thing for my organization, for my team members? We know that unprecedented times, this is a time that in modern history we have not lived through. It calls for extraordinary leadership. And that looks like the behavior in this time are leaders who make really informed, thoughtful, and caring decisions for the constituency that they care for. And so with that, we're going to ask you one last question on Mentimeter. And this is not—
Sarah, could I jump in really quick? Just before we go to Mentimeter, we had a question through the chat room. This is a really good one about how do you craft the message and communication to baby boomers versus millennials versus, baby boomers. Like each generation might have their own. I offer just this, and working with our clients, we don't. I'm honest, I'm transparent. I tell them what the hill is we have to climb, where the gap is. We talk about what we're going to do. Everyone's going to sacrifice. I don't worry about the generation. And I'm not trying to say that there aren't differences or there's a certain preference of the communication style. But I will tell you, when we ask people to associate a word with layoffs, if I ask baby boomers that, I get your list. If I ask Gen Z that, I get that list. So we just offering it up. If you have some tips on how to do that, perfectly fine. Put those in the chat room. But I think we're giving you the play pattern that works for human beings. Is there anything to add on that before we shift to Mentimeter?
No, but just another question that's coming in on the Q&A, and a couple of people have raised, there's differences between 2008, 2009 and the current circumstance, and certainly acknowledge that is absolutely true, both in terms of the severity, but a comment from Diana that there's entire markets that have disappeared from one day to the other, not just a reduction of 15 or 30%, but in some instances it has evaporated. We can relate from that standpoint of we're literally in the business of putting people in the same room. One of our largest clients is an airline, and so we resonate and empathize that this doesn't necessarily, it's not a cookie cutter approach. And so the question is, how do we adapt these approaches when cash needs to sustain a company for potentially months? And so I don't know that we come into this conversation saying that it will absolutely work, but we would say, have we examined all of the different measures as we go along, and certainly acknowledge that there are organizations that will be forced into closing their doors. So I just don't want to ignore that or brush over it or not empathize with the fact that there are organizations for whom that would very much be a reality.
Yep, that's a really good point. And I think this entire process, as Sarah mentioned, is can I increase my consciousness level of how I'm thinking through these decisions? Am I being more intentional than in my behaviors, and especially intentional in how I communicate that out, even if it is layoffs or perhaps this industry is completely changing?
So as we go into the final Mentimeter question, this is an opportunity for you all to share with each other. It's not about the webinar content or feedback to us, but this is so that you can all put in, and then we can share this document with you all to say, here's what people who went through this are going to perhaps do a little bit differently as a result of this webinar. And so anything specific that you want to put in there that says things that we've heard in the past, or I'm going to restructure my communication. We're not planning for layoffs, but now I'm going to think about the fact that that's entering into people's mind. And so I'm going to start talking about the fact that for right now, we're okay. So really anything that you are doing differently to show up for the people in your span of care, we can gather all of those up and give you this document back so that we have the benefit of everybody's thoughts that are on this call. So we're seeing some things come in, communication around plans for the future, listening to the customer, being more employee-centric, use of inspirational quotes, we like that one. The target diagrams, that's that control, influence, can't control. Shared sacrifice is the message. So perhaps the use of that terminology. Thinking about this from a change mindset perspective. We're kind of all in a constant state of never-ending change, and so that certainly does have an impact on how we're all showing up. Consider more extensively along the roster you provided, not sure about that one. Focus on being more versatile and adaptive. So that difference between technical and adaptive change, communicate even if they're not asking, focusing on value, adding a little more creativity, we could all use that.
A lot on the communication,
Yeah.
especially even talking to the team, even if you haven't been yet, or telling them how you're thinking through, really good ones.
Okay. Good comment, makes me hopeful to see such a human-centered conversation. We have a team huddle every morning, and one of our team members shared that a friend of hers was laid off by email. And so I know that our network and the people that we are fortunate to have a lot of conversations with, that's almost unthinkable, but it is happening. And those are things that are happening to people that we care about.
Like this one, we've already cut leadership pay by third to lead from the front. We are considering a small layoff. We'll reconsider based on this information. That's great. And so I appreciate you all sharing for each other. We will also, in addition to providing the slides, we'll download these comments and to provide these comments to you as well.
Mm-hmm. So feel free to, keep putting that into your smart device, into your phone, just so that we capture the benefit of everyone's thinking. As we transition back over, at least to the view, to the screen, we're going to bring up our last poll question. So we're going to poll inside of the Zoom software, and that's just feedback on this webinar. And our ask to you is this, to please just go ahead and quickly fill that out. It helps us make these opportunities better for the next group that's going to come in. So as Matt continues to try and bring that poll up, just a little patience as we work a little tech issue. Sometimes these polls don't go up as quickly as we would like them to. As he works on that, we're also going to be putting up our website and resources. And so there we have a COVID page on our website with all kinds of things that you can download, and also our emails. So you can reach out to Matt or myself directly. And this is no economics. There's no contract that we put in place, but it is an opportunity if you want somebody to brainstorm with you, or you want somebody to kind of coach your leadership team through the decisions that you're facing, we're happy to do that. We do assessments, leadership development, training courses, consulting. That's the work that we love to do, and we'd love to do it with you all. So with that, we'll stay on and answer any questions that you put into the Q&A or into the chat, and we'll stay on live and do that. For anybody that would like to, I'm looking at one that's coming in now. It says, I've not seen much communication from leaders of our company except practical instructions. Would it be correct to remind our CEO or our executive team that people need to communicate more frequently? We're ready for good or bad news, but the no news is something which worries me. So that's a great comment. I think this is going to be extremely technical, but in the absence of information, people make stuff up. We know that is true. And so even if the message is stay the course, steady the course, people do need to hear that. This is an opinion, but I absolutely believe that it would be correct to deliver that feedback and deliver it in a way that says, hey, when we don't hear from you, this is what it's causing to happen. Here's the impact that I'm experiencing myself personally, and here's perhaps the impact to my team and how it's showing up inside the business. So we would be big advocates to say absolutely deliver that feedback.
Yeah, I think that's the turn it up to 11. And just to say this, I think for some senior teams, they'll say to themselves, well, I just sound like a broken record. I'm saying the same things over and over and over. And what they don't realize is for the organization, that's literally the drumbeat. that we're walking to, that we're marching to on this. And so it may be like, I don't know if I want to keep saying the things. Communicate, communicate, communicate.
We do have a couple of people with raised hands.
And if you can just put that, if you have a raised hand, please do me a favor, put that in the chat, and we will answer that question as it comes in. I love this comment, and I reset it into the chat room, but someone said, experience the same. Saving company equals self-preservation. Saving each other equals got your back. One of our things we do in some of our leadership curriculum is we'll ask people, what inspires you? Name a single word that inspires you. And then we'll use Mentimeter or some kind of polling software to show people what they are thinking, what inspires them. 100% of the time, it is always about people serving people. If I want to leverage that inspiration, it's always about, can we help each other? Can we save each other? Sarah, question in here about what tool did you use at Barry-Wehmiller to manage the furlough exchange system in 08 and 09?
Gosh, that's a great question. And I'm afraid that it was terribly unsophisticated. The tool was basically, you could donate days into your local kind of, we call it culture and people development. The equivalent is HR, and say, I'm willing to submit kind of X number of days that I want to donate into the pool. And then people could kind of submit, you know, an application that was just through a SurveyMonkey that was anonymous that says, you know, I need those tools, please contact me. And so it's, at the time the organization was much smaller. We were about 5,000-6,000 people, mostly in the US. It's a much more complicated situation for us now, with 12,000 people globally. But those are, you know, we use the tools that we had. So I apologize, that's not a more sophisticated answer.
I'm going to take two of these questions really quickly. One of them is, what if I'm not the CEO and the senior leadership team? Are there things that I can do with my specific team, department? Absolutely. I am going to tell you this isn't a Pollyanna kind of thing. I'm not going to tell you that, yes, you can work it all out. There's still going to be nervous and wanting to hear from the senior leaders who do the exact same things with your teams. So as an example, as a commander in the US military, when the overall Department of Defense was making decisions, and some of them I knew about and some that I did not, I'm still talking to my team constantly. And I'm going to bridge into Ryan's question, Ryan Holtzman from Holt Electrical Supplies. They've just been a really incredible organization here in St. Louis serving other businesses. His question was, when people are really stressed, can you give any tips on communicating with team members when everyone's more stressed than normal, anything to avoid? I'm going to ask Sarah to help me out with this one. I'm going to stay away from what's to avoid. Well, I'll go right after it. What to avoid is to call everyone together and just start transmitting at them. I wouldn't tell them things like it's going to be just fine. Don't worry. You're worried about nothing. We've seen worse. It's a media hype. I wouldn't do anything that takes away from acknowledging how they are feeling. So the key word that you gave us in that, Ryan, is if people feel stressed, great. Then what I might do is acknowledge that. I would imagine all of us are pretty stressed. These are unprecedented times. I have some information to share with you. Before that, I'd like to hear with you. I'd like to hear from you. What are you thinking? What's on your mind? I might open it up that way. Let people, it's not just venting, let people articulate what actually is stressing them out. And then instead of telling them not to worry about it, that's the one part I would avoid, because then the person literally doesn't feel heard. And if 70, I think the stats are around 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, the one thing I need to do is show up as a great leader and listen first. Then I'm going to present some information. I'm going to tell you what I do know and what I don't know. And I'm going to tell you that all of us are going to sacrifice something so we can try and make it out of this. Those are some things I would recommend. Sarah, anything to add on that one? That's a great question, Ryan.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, and we're certainly doing this on our team, is your team needs to see you more than they did previously. And so whatever existing communication structure, and if it has to be virtual, it has to be virtual, but just the visibility from leadership, that happens on a daily basis. And so, and if it is steady the course, there's kind of a no news to share, then get on and share that there is no news, linking back to the previous question. Because people's lives are changing day to day and they need to know that they are secure, or perhaps that something is coming, either way.
Hey,
We
Sarah,
had
another.
a question
Yep.
oh, sorry, in the Q&A for
Yes, thank you.
Suzanne, when with the donation of time, were there parameters put around who is eligible for the time, and if so, what were they? And I will say that we did not specifically, and you could, however, with the right framing, which for us was, simply if you cannot afford to take the time off, we want you to submit that concern to the appropriate person. And with that framing, we had zero issues with people kind of quote unquote applying that you would say, gosh, I don't know that you deserve it based on your pay band or the work that you're doing. That simply didn't happen. And so I think because we're implementing, when we say it's shared sacrifice, the vast majority of people are going to show up and do the right thing. So not saying that that's what you should do, but for us, it wasn't an issue. And we just emphasize this is for people who cannot afford to take even 1 week of furlough. This is your avenue for expressing that concern.
Yep. Andy Busing from Hutton Construction has a really great question as well. How do companies deal with performance issues if we decide not to do layoffs? How do you suggest we message this to our employees? And when we tell people up front that just because we're not doing layoffs, we still remove people who choose not to work safe or choose to underperform, etc. Again, I'll start off. Sarah can finish this part up on this. One thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to mix those two messages. I'm going to stick with, here's my play pattern. Here's what I'm coming back to. Here's the conditions that we're under. Here are our values. Here's a decision that we're making. It takes all of us to lean in. Separately, if there is a concern over safety, as an example, or work performance, I'd handle those on an individual basis. I don't want to present us, this is about saving each other, and then at the same time, present a threat of, but if you don't do this, here are the consequences. I would keep the consequences for individuals. I think one of the items that we see clients doing, and this was no different in any organization, this is not a judgment, when we start to make these bigger decisions, such as shared sacrifice, I think sometimes it's important for you to just do the math. I think what you'll see, and to Sarah just mentioned this, the percentage of your people that are leaning in, helping, working like hell to get this done and get through this time will far outnumber, around an 80-20 percentage, the people who are not or complaining. I would deal with those individually and mentally being remembered and remembering to yourself mathematically how many people are out there doing a really great, incredible job for the organization and trying to get through. It'll help with your sanity when you do get a few people or a small percentage that are starting to complain a little bit on that. But I wouldn't have those two conversations in the same time and space. Sarah, anything to add on that, please?
Nothing dramatic to add. I would say the first question we asked for the client organization that was ready to lay off and do a layoff was, well, is it a performance issue? If it's a performance issue, let's handle that as we would handle a typical performance issue. And then it kind of falls into a different category. And so I think those kind of proceed as they would, layoff being very, very different from a safety standpoint. We would lean into values. And so whatever that is, I can more easily give a Barry Waymiller example, but if we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people, then that means I care a whole heck of a lot that you go home safe to your family. And never, this is a time period where that is extremely important. And so have the safety conversation, to Matt's point, as a separate agenda item that connects straight back to your values.
Yeah, thank you. And Tara Rogers, I'll also tell the panel, we've used our values to build our culture. Our culture is proving to be the antivirus for our business. Yet it's not easy and sometimes feels scary. This has brought us all together like we've never had before. And you hear Sarah and I harping on the values perspective. Those values and talking about culture is not a soft skill. It's literally a resilient skill. This is the time that I lean into that, because values are usually based on people serving people. This is why I'm leaning into those so hard now, is to say who we are in tough times is who we truly are. That is our character and our cultures. This is the time that we step up. There's a reason we're constantly harping on that, and starting with those values. And if you don't have value, if it's a purpose, if it's a mission statement, fine, lean into that part of it. So, and I do another webinar on kind of leading through COVID. And so I'm pulling some of the thoughts from that session, and we'll send that recording out as well. But one of the items that people will say is, well, what if we haven't mentioned our values ever before? Now is a great time, and just admit it. We should have been using this. We should have been talking about them. We should have been using our values as a filter for decision-making before. We haven't. Bad on us. We're going to now. And if you haven't articulated what those values are, then use whatever you can. And if not, then I'm going to just say right back to this is not about saving the company or a balance sheet. This is about saving each other. And as I know we're wrapping up on time here, we're going to be very respectful. So anyone that needs to go, please do. We will stay on. We'll answer any of those questions. We'll probably play some music in here. So if you have any other questions, you can put it into the chat room or you can put it onto Q&A. But as we close, it's just a huge respect. We know this is a very challenging conversation, a challenging decision that you all are faced with. This is not us judging whether you do or don't do layoffs. Again, it's just simply thinking through. For some of you, it's how do I return to profitability? For some of you, it's how do we just survive the next 6 months? Either way, I hope we've given you some information that allows you to think deeper and more conscientiously about it and then making a more intentional decision. Sarah, with that, we are going to close out. As mentioned, we're going to stay on. We'll play some music. Hard copies of the deck, this part of it, also leading through COVID. Yes, we will provide both of those to all of you that registered and attended. Even the people that didn't attend and registered, we'll provide those for you. We are doing this webinar again on the 6th of April at 11 a.m. Eastern time. No, I'm sorry, Sarah, 1 p.m. Eastern time, and that's through Ceridian, and we will send that out as well, that invitation out to all of you to share if you think someone else in your organization or another organization would benefit from this. So appreciate again your time, your attention, and joining in with Mentimeter and providing the information. We'll send this all out to you by the end of the day today. Thank you very much. Take care.